appreciated. And without further ado, Eric Stewart is the program chair for the Healthcare Informatics program at Bellevue College. He was a Lean Six Sigma black belt for GE and Providence Health and provided process improvement in departments like IT, HR, supply chain, finance, legal, pharmacy, and surgical operations. He also teaches process improvement, project management, and change management for government and business. Eric has worked with the cities of Renton and Yakima, Snohomish County, and the Kennewick Fire Department. Thank you so much for being here, Eric. Go ahead and take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. All right. All right, Rachel, can you see my screen?
Yes, it looks great.
Excellent. All right, so let's get started. So I've been doing this for about 30 years, and I really enjoy being able to work with groups, work with teams, and then also work with creating these types of opportunities for myself. What I'm here to do is I'm here to show you what I've learned so far along this journey and share some ideas for you to be able to improve your ability to use innovation and design thinking, especially in the area of creativity. All right, so today I'm going to walk you through the innovation and design thinking process and really provide a high level view of the process with a focus on inspired creative thinking. So in my experience as a consultant, as a black belt, I facilitated many process and projects and events that required people who perform processes that use innovation and have to come up with creative ideas. And so during these processes, during these events or workshops, I would design the workshops or events, but it was really up to the people to come up with these creative thinkings. And every time we were able to come up with some sort of creative, new, novel way of answering the question. And at that point, I was able to trust the process. As I've been going through and studying more about creativity, I'm starting to learn more about how to leverage and apply creative thinking principles to be able to get people thinking creatively. These are the types of things that I want to show you. Now, the model that I'm going to use a mental model on this. And I'm going to use this as we're going to be taking a plane trip, a flight trip. And so I've got little diagrams here. We're going to start off in a flight plan and kind of figuring out the what, the how, and the why. We're going to start off with kind of this grounding, get our bearings. And then when we start to work with people, work with teams, we need to be able to identify those opportunities. We're taking off to where we're going. And then while we're flying along, while we're at our cruising altitude, we're going to be working on generating ideas. And we're going to be looking at different ways we can do that, either yourself, with a team, or with a team in a virtual manner. And then when we start to descend toward our destination, we take the steps. We need to evaluate and decide which of these great ideas you're going to do, how to be able to develop and test to make sure the idea is going to work, and then how do you plan for implementation, those steps for implementation. These are the things I'm going to show you. So I'm going to be giving you a lot of different tools today that you can dig into, but this is meant to be a really high level view of the process. And so we'll start off with questions. This is our first section where we start off with some of the questions of how, the why, and the what. And so this is what we're going to dig into when we start to start our journey. And so when we start off, what is innovation? Innovation is creating ideas. It's transforming ideas into outcomes. And so innovation is the practical implementation of ideas that results in the introduction of a new goods or service or project or an improvement. The design thinking is a human-centered approach used for problem solving and innovation. So I've kind of combined these approaches so that if you're more on the innovation side, if you're looking at more of the spectrum of how to generate ideas and then be able to make plans to implement, this process will help you. And design thinking, where I'm also going to be looking at how to use human-centered approaches, how to use empathy in your process. But I'm going to be looking at the creativity element and how to implement these processes that you're going to be learning about. So let's take a look at creativity. Why is creativity so hard? Why do we feel challenged by creativity? Well, the primary reason is that there's an idea that there's only one way of doing things. Sometimes we get stuck on these things. Steve Krug, in his book Don't Make Me Think, claimed humans generally make a choice and we stick with it. This is a book on web design, and sometimes we make that choice and then we stick with it, even if it's not working out so well. We call that satisficing, and we'd rather muddle through the choice that we've made rather than back up and try something new. Sometimes when we have a problem, we focus on what's wrong with the new idea. We focus on what's broken rather than coming up with a solution on the way to fix it. So sometimes we'll look at the symptom of the problem, and when we get to root cause, we'll be able to kind of separate symptom from the cause. And so so if we start to focus on what's wrong with an idea, sometimes we limit our thinking. And sometimes we don't take the time to consider alternatives. I've heard plenty of times during projects that I've done, during presentations that I've done, is that everyone has the feeling that we're trying to change the tire in a car while the car is still running down the road. We need to take the time to stop the car and fix the tire so that we can keep going ahead. We have to take that time to be able to move ahead. And it's okay to take that time to look at the different consideration, to look at the different alternatives. And then sometimes there's biases that limit our thinking that really get in the way of creativity. There's a lot of metacognitive biases that out there that really try to take away our stimulating our ways that we stimulate good thinking. Now, one of the biases that I'd like to point out is the one that Daniel Kahneman calls "what you see is all there is." What you see is all there is tends to be one of the most limiting factors on creativity, because when we look at something, when we look at a problem, we don't consider other alternatives that might be out of frame, that we don't bring into the solution making process. And so by getting past this, what you see is all there is thinking, you can get more into the creative space. So there's some creative myths that are out there. There's some ideas that say, okay, I can't think creatively, that creative thinking is only spontaneous. The thing about spontaneous, we think of Archimedes and his eureka moment when he figured out how to define gold from silver, when he was sitting in the bathtub and he jumps out of the bathtub and he has it and he runs through the streets naked going eureka. And we all think of that moment where creative thinking is spontaneous. What I'm here to propose is that creative thinking is a process. And if you understand the process, you can prime your brain to be thinking spontaneously. There's also this idea that only certain people think creatively. One of my first classes I was working with some engineers, and I was doing a class, how to be creative. And the engineers go, this isn't going to work for us. But by going through a process of how to think creatively, they were coming up with novel ideas by the end of the class. And then the picture I have here is from Rube Goldberg. Rube Goldberg was an inventor and a creator and a cartoonist back in the 1930s. And he came up with these ideas that were overly complex, had a lot of moving parts. And sometimes we think that creative solutions need to have that level of complexity. Complex creative solutions can really be pretty simple. So the steps for innovation, I'm going to talk about innovation and design thinking. And so innovation is, the first step is to identify the opportunities. We have to figure out what's wrong. And then we go through and we generate ideas. This is where we're going to go through that creative building process. And then in our journey, we're going to evaluate and select the idea that we're going to pick. We develop and prototype, and then implement and sustain. And I'll talk a little bit about sustainment at the end. Now, let me compare this to design thinking. Design thinking, we break down that opportunities. We empathize with our customers. We listen to our customers to understand where they're coming from so that we understand the problem really well. And then we define off our understanding. This takes an open mindedness that's really vital for creative solution making. So when we start off with design thinking, when we put ourselves in the space of the customer, we really have that way where we're going, this is what the customer feels. It opens our minds and starts that creative processing. Then we'll go through and ideate. And this is the heart of creativity, where we think of new ideas, and then we'll be able to try them out, see if they work, design and build a prototype, and have some testing to see if it works. These are all part of our airplane journey. Now, one of the things I wanted to give you while we're going through this is ways to manage the process. Now, when I think through the ways that you can manage it, the ways I've used this in the past, is that I've either done this on my own, and you can do this on your own in terms of what is a thing that you're going to do at your desk. Let's say that you're an individual contributor that is a belt or trying to improve a process. You can manage this process, but you need to write it down as you go. It's hard to do this all at once, so you need to write these ideas down. If you're working with a team, you can either do it in a meeting or a workshop. And what I found time and time again is that typically when we do some sort of process improvement, we do this in the space, in kind of the space that already exists, which is the team meeting. And so we might have to break up each one of these activities between meetings. One meeting will do identifying opportunities. The next meeting will generate ideas. The next meeting will go through and figure out what solution we're going to work on. Or we can do it all at once. And I've done these in big workshops. We've had different names around them. These can be workshops that last between 3 hours and 2 weeks. The 2 weeks ones were a monster. We had several facilitators, and we came up with a lot of different outcomes. But the process we used was essentially the same for the 2 week workshops than we did for the 2 hour workshops. The idea is to do all the parts of the planning. And so I'll give you a planning document, and then we'll work through that. Now, the two things I'm going to add to this is the priming and the activities. These are the things that need to happen for creativity to happen. So I'm going to be focusing on these as a specific type of event that need to happen during these meetings or workshops. So one of the things that you'll get an A3 innovative tracking workshop. The A3 is meant to be a big piece of paper that you're writing out all your ideas so that you can see everything all at once. This really uses our visual management processing system so that we can see all the different things all at once, so that our eyes can take it in all at once. When we do visual thinking, it tends to be holistic. And when we are able to put it on one sheet rather than individual sheets, our brain processes this on a different level. Now, the one that you've gotten out there is a PDF that's in an 8x10. You can blow this up to 11x17, which is closer to A3 size, or you can put this on a wall and work this as a team so that everybody's putting up. What I would suggest is not just putting on words, but adding pictures and diagrams and charts, something that attracts our visual thinking processes. Another thing that you can do is you can follow along using a meeting planning worksheet. This is an example I have of a meeting planning worksheet where these are the elements, the standard elements of a meeting: the opening, the defining the opportunities, the generating ideas, develop and test, action planning, that occur during either a meeting that can be separated over different meetings, or can be part of a workshop planning method. So this is the template I use. I determine how much time they're going to be for each one of these. Based on the group and the type of problem, I'll pick the tool or the approach and get that set up. And it's either me or somebody else that's facilitating this. But this is a good planning tool to be able to use this methodology to go forward. Why is this important? Why is creativity important? Sometimes we're responding to a problem. We're either meeting the needs of the customer or responding to competition, or we're trying to get ahead. We're trying to do something creative to improve what we're doing. So it might be an urgent thing, or it might be a growth thing like continuous improvement, creative development, or growth for our team. So now we're going to start taking off and we're going to look at some of the ways that we can come up with opportunities. These are the set of opportunities that this is the tools that we're going to use. Now, there's more tools out there, but I'm just going to focus on some of the tools and compare some of these. Now, the problem statement is probably the process improvement bread and butter. We're always going for that problem statement, describing the problem and being able to, so that people understand what is the current situation and what is it justifying, why are we doing this? And sometimes we include the pain for the customer. We have that we have that sense of urgency, and we create the steps toward good change management. And if we can define the metrics, if we can say this is where we started and this is where we want to go, we'll tell if we're making a difference. If we're design thinking, we're gathering information by talking to people, by doing interviews and asking them what the problem is. We can combine that problem statement thinking and really put that into the framework of how do we listen to people and get what they need. We can also develop personas, which are representations of people that may not be talking directly to people, but allow us to formulate our solutions so they address certain types of people. Or we can create a customer journey map where we identify what is the process that the customer experiences while they're experiencing our process. Now, I put out the gap analysis because if there's no apparent problem, if there's no apparent issue, the gap analysis is a good tool to get into more of a continuous improvement or growth state. If you can identify where you are and where you want to be, that gap in the middle becomes the opportunity. It may not be a defined problem, but it represents our opportunity to go forward. So it's just another way of reframing a way to identify opportunities. Process approaches. I love process approaches. I've done tons of process mapping and storyboarding where you're really trying to go through and you're trying to understand the elements of the process. Where a problem statement or might give you more of a snapshot in time, the process approach give you what happens over time to a specific customer, to a specific product. What do these things look like? And when you can break these things down, sometimes the opportunities become apparent. I also bring up work breakdown. Work breakdown is something that lives more in the project management space to be able to decompose work into its specific elements. If we can decompose work, sometimes we can get and understand it and figure out those opportunities. And storyboarding is just a robust way of understanding the problem through process mapping using pictures and more details of how the process works. These are all good ways to identify some process approaches. And then root cause. Some practitioners separate problem identification from root cause, but I'm adding it kind of in the same bundle because root cause is a way to identify the opportunity, but it always should be your next step, your final step, to make sure that you're not just putting a band-aid on things, but you're really addressing the cause of why this happened. If you simply put a band-aid on, if you address the symptom, you're fixing it once. But if you address the cause, you're fixing it for the long term. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to get into the meat of this, and we're going to look at creativity itself. We're going to look at generating ideas. And I'm going to start off with some of the basic principles behind creativity, the creative thinking process, cognitive traits, and priming. So creativity is a fairly new idea. Much of in history, creativity really was something that wasn't thought of as being human-based, that there was good ideas out there and we simply discovered them. It wasn't until the 1900s with Graham Wallace that came up with this idea that humans were thinking of really new things, that the idea of innovation and creativity was that different inputs came in and new ideas came out. And so the steps that we're going to cover here are preparation, understand the problem, incubation, letting the brain work on the problem, illumination, coming up with the answer, and then verification, getting it out of our heads, writing it down, and trying it out. So we have to prepare our brains for creativity. We have to get ready to think for creativity. And this is where I start to dig in to some of the places that I've been able to discover and apply in more recent types of facilitation ventures. One is divergent thinking, being able to look at more than one thing, being able to expand your thinking. There's tools we can do to get people thinking divergently. This is a skill that we can bring out of people and have them practice before. There's also the effect of personality. When I was working with I was working with a middle school teacher she had brought up the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs personality test, and was asking why some students were more creative than others. The intuitives think ahead, their future thinking, then they tend to think of all the possibilities where creativity aligns well. If we look at the sensors, they think of past experiences, and they're the ones that struggle. But if we reframe we reframe the assignment to say either think of something new or bring two ideas from your past together in a new way, both the sensors and the intuitives were able to be creative. And so being able to understand that different people think differently in creativity. Having an open mind. This is a really key thing in being able to not be in a spot where you're defending your position, but looking on and having an attitude of, I could be wrong, or think of different ways of doing things. That whole idea, that idea of the open mind is critical in training, education, and especially critical in creativity, thinking of different ways that it could happen. And being in a good mood is critical for creativity in terms of our hormones and our physiology. When we're stressed out, we tend to think in more analytically. So when we're chased by a bear, we're not thinking, okay, is this a black bear? Is it a brown bear? Do I need to play dead? Do I need to go up a tree? We just act. That's the way our brains are wired. And so when we're in stressed out and we have that adrenaline going, it's very difficult to be creative. And so if we're asking a group, be creative now or else, we're really stamping out creativity. But if we create a good mood, we're more likely to have those different types of thoughts. People will be more engaged in risk taking. And Adam Grant brings this idea up. It's not just a skill set, it's a mindset. It's the way people think, and it's a particular set of skills that people can have. And both of these can be encouraged and developed. So what we're going to do with most of our activities, we're going to be looking at how to clear the mind, how to get ready and reduce distractions, and then setting the stage of understanding the problem and being in a good mood. And then we'll do some simple creative thinking activities to get people primed for creativity. Now I'm going to pause for a moment. Rachel, are there any clarifying questions out there?
Not at this point. You're good.
Excellent. So now that we've started the creative process, let's apply this. Let's take a look at ourselves first. And so what do we need for our individual innovation? So I'm going to talk a little bit about priming and preparing, and then I'll talk about 3 different methods that you can use. So some of the ways that we can prepare to be creative is we can have mindfulness. We can be aware of our feelings. We can be aware of our thoughts by doing meditation and gratitude practice. Gratitude practice helps us to be happy and in a good mood. We can't be grateful and angry. We can't be grateful and fearful. When we start practicing positive gratitude, our brain leans toward being in a good mood, which stimulates those hormones for creativity. Exercise also benefits mood. it benefits our body. It releases hormones into our body that enable good feelings. And so exercise is a really positive way to go. In the book Happiness Advantage, Sean Achor talks about the not that exercise has really a huge positive influence on finding happiness. And then sleep, there's a lot of sleep research out there that identifies that sleep is a critical element for how we feel in our bodies and our cognitive processes. So if we're trying to think of something on our own, to get ready to prime ourselves is to start off in that good mood. How can we do that? We can do this by gratitude. That's probably the best idea. There's also what's called laugh therapy. Our physical nature helps us to be, it'll set our mood. So if we smile, our mood actually raises. In the book by Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman talks about some of the experiments that they do where they have people, they change their mood by having them not smile by biting on a pencil. And so by smiling, you actually start to be in a good mood. Limit your distractions. Take your phone out, turn it off, limit your distractions. Have a beginning and end. Have a place that you're gonna start your problem and where you're gonna end your problem, and then have some time limits that you're gonna be doing this. And in the book, The Art of the Impossible, Stephen Kotler talks about taking a walk outside because being outside prepares our mind to think expansively instead of being locked in our cubicle. Then we can do things that help our mind be prepared, that create those little those games, those icebreakers for our own mind. We can do word association. Sudoku is a great way to get our mind thinking of different connections. By making it more complex, by making the question not binary, yes or no, but by making it more complex. Um, Brandon Boyle from IDEO talks about an activity he does. He doesn't call it an icebreaker, he calls it a creative workout. And he'll start off his class by ask questions about that pencil, about that number 2 pencil. Why is it yellow? Why is it so long? Can it be recycled? Ask more questions. And the more creative questions you get, the more it stimulates that creative part of your brain. Now, in the book, Art of the Impossible, Stephen Kotler talks about the writer for MacGyver. The writer for MacGyver, Lee Zotloff, had to be innovated every week. He had to think of a new thing for MacGyver to do. Now, MacGyver, he came up with innovative gadget, and the person that wrote for this had to think of these on a weekly basis. So he perfected this idea of first he would write down the idea, or first he'd write down the problem or the theme of the show or the plot. And then he would go and do something mildly stimulating. This goes back to that incubation part. Taking a walk, going for a drive. He would take a shower. He would go home and take a shower. Not TV. TV will upset the whole process. So it has to be something mildly stimulating where you're kind of taking your mind off of it for a while, but part of your brain is still working on it. And then going through and doing free writing where you're writing out, starting to write words, and during the free writing, the answer will come. Another way to do this is mind mapping. Mind mapping was created by Tony Buzan in 1970, and basically it takes advantage of the cognitive process. It's how our brains work. And so what we'll do is we'll put the idea in the center, and then we'll start to create branches off of that idea. And each of these branches can create sub branches. And the more colors we use, if we have lots of different color pens in our drawer next to us, then this will engage our visual thinking system. And so the more we can engage all of our brain by adding branches, using colors, using pictures, and just keeping it to one word, this will engage part of our brain to think of different ideas, to think of the ideas creatively. And then getting back to our example of what do we do with people that are past thinkers is put 2 different ideas together, put 2 random things that possibly could be associated with your problem, and then let your mind think about how they can be combined together. many of the inventions and innovations have come with this process where people have just looked at things and they said, how can we put these two things together, and been able to recombine them into a brand new thing. Now, let's talk about how we expand this out from ourselves to our team. How can we get our team engaged in getting there? Now, the thing about teams is that, well, actually, it's easier to manage our own behavior. It's harder to manage others' behavior. But the creative process is enhanced by including more people. You're going to get more creative ideas, especially in the space that lives between people during that good communication. So here's some ways that we can get our teams to be creative. Now, these team skills for creativity, as you look through these, you probably identify as, yeah, these are great skills for all teams to be able to communicate and talk together, but these are vital for creativity, to be able to do active listening, to be able to listen to each other and understand. This means that people have open minds, to be able to share knowledge, to be able to think diversely and create safety for risk taking. This is vital in terms of teams to be able to think of creative and innovative ideas. You have to be in a space where you put out ideas that will probably fail, and it will be okay. And by doing that, by having diverse thinking, you start to build trust. Accountability is key in terms of being able to own your own thoughts and feelings. And this takes groups out of the blame game, and it helps build mutual accountability. Not only are you going to be productive, but you're going to be more creative. And then to be able to celebrate the wins and have fun, this is something that you really need to that you have to build in to have good creative teams. It not only creates good feelings, it also creates motivation. And Brandon Boyle from IDEO quotes Dr. Stuart Brown as saying, the opposite of play is not work, it's boredom. So how can we actively do this? So we can put together we can start off with a good creative workshop or an icebreaker in terms of getting people to think creatively. One of my favorite that I use is from a monologue that's in Tina Fey's book, Bossy Pants, where she describes how to do improv. And it's called Yes and. And the idea here is that you're contributing to the next person, what the next person has to say. And then we practice this as a group. We'll go around, I'll start off with a story. The next person has to start off with yes and add to the story. No matter what I say, they have to react to it. And so by doing this, it allows them to think open-mindedly. The what if game is where we take two random ideas and pair them together. And so it helps people think it kind of takes them off the one idea thinking thing and helps them steer toward creativity. An example I have would be if I were to put out as an icebreaker, pair the idea of putting a lawnmower with a spoon, and what kind of device would that be? It starts getting people thinking of different creative ideas. Alternate uses. I've used this several times with the pencil idea, where we think of alternate uses for a pencil. Not only is it for writing and erasing, it can be used for measurement. It can be used to find things down holes. And so when we start thinking in that way, we can take ordinary devices and look for different ways they can be used. Counterfactual is a thought game where you ask people what happened if there was a different set of events. For example, the one that I have here is, how would our diets be different if our main food source was rocks and boulders? And getting people kind of thinking of something weird and different helps them to be creative. And then taking a different perspective. I've been with groups that are resistant to change, and so I have them write a business case on what the different perspective would look like. Being able to see a problem from a different perspective is a good way to promote creativity. And one of my favorite tools is the 7 ways. This is getting the idea of coming up with 7 different ways of fixing an idea. Usually idea 1 is pretty easy. And idea 2, people have something in their back pocket. But getting to the next few ideas is really something that people struggle with. There's this creative resistance. There's a workshop over at the Grove, a firm in, visual facilitation firm in San Francisco that describes this creative process, and they call that the cognitive resistance. And so this is that resistance to ideas that we're kind of stewing through. I also think, based on the research, that this is the part that people are percolating and thinking of these ideas before the ideas come out. And what I find over and over again is that when one person submits a different idea, then the rest of the ideas pretty much fall into place after that. People start thinking, we start to get over that cognitive hump early on, about the same time. Scamper is a way, is a reframing tool where you can take the problem and look at it in different ways. And there's 7 different ways to do this. You can do all 7. You can choose 1 or 2, depending on your time and depending on the audience. Sometimes you'll come up with an answer right away. Sometimes it'll take a few times. But what you do is you take the problem and then you apply one of these tools to it. Like, you take the problem and you adapt it to a different environment. You modify it and make it look different so that people think of new ideas. Gamification is a great way to make fun, to produce lightheartedness, especially out of heavy duty issues, reframing the process so that it becomes more of a game than a task at work. And so in gamification, you would create a mission, you would build rules to promote more ideas, and give points for risks and mistakes. Any of those things that happen, you give points to, and then use a leaderboard to allow those competitive people to actually start to engage more in this approach. Now, what happens if you get stuck? So sometimes you need to relook at the problem. This is going back to Scamper, or tilt the problem. The first 4 come from Whack on the Side of the Head by Roger Oakes, as far as things to do if you get stuck in creativity. Number 1 is to kind of look at the problem differently. Number 2 is start breaking the problem down into what, when, or where. Try to define some of the attributes. Go back to the problem itself and take a look and see what those, or if you're into root cause, take a look and see what those specific root causes are. Splitting hairs is making the problem smaller, compartmentalizing it, trying to make it look at a different way. And then one of the approaches that they have is to come up with a set of random words that you simply attach the random words and you say, how can we make this random word apply to the solution? This gets people thinking in a creative manner. Now, the 2 that I've added here is sometimes you need some fresh eyes. Sometimes you have to have a break, and you need that time to be able to think. And if you're coming back with fresh eyes and you're giving the group a break, I would recommend that you do have them go for a walk or do something that's mildly stimulated that isn't TV, or watching a funny video. This is the idea that taking a short video to get people laughing and bringing in humor is a good way of getting people to engage. So what about virtual teams? Virtual teams are there's some challenges behind it because we're not face to face. Many of the tools that we had are really kind of designed. They were designed for in-person teams. How do we apply this to virtual teams? Well, the challenge of virtual teams is that we don't get to see each other. There's some real communication barriers because we're not seeing each other face to face, or we see a little square. Sometimes there's technical issues where people get knocked off. And really, there's a lack of nonverbal cues. We can't see a lot of the nonverbal cues that are included in communication. So it's harder to build trust, and there's accountability challenges. And in some cases, people are just feeling disconnected. These are the kind of the challenges that you have in virtual teams. When we're talking about virtual teams, I kind of classify this into real life, more synchronous work, where we see pictures and faces. We can talk back and forth. This includes Zoom, Teams, Skype, WebEx. And then there's the asynchronous work where we can put it into a workspace and leave it there. Mural and Miro are 2 examples of where to create an asynchronous space. I think that in creative work, you should leverage both. You should meet synchronously and then put the work asynchronous so that you give people that percolation time, that time to be able to think in things. Now, If we're working on a virtual team, we want to prime their thinking. We can take any of those priming that we did in teams and put those over in the virtual space. For example, the counterfactual icebreaker. What would my life be like? You can have a little card that says this, and then you can add little cards and have people join in and give the answers on little post-its. What would my be like if I had joined the circus? What would my life be like if I had lived in Antarctica? And so you can go through and do the same sort of priming things and getting people thinking of spontaneous or thinking of creative solutions in this virtual space. And then setting up your virtual space to use any of the creative processes, putting up a virtual scamper board and then leaving it up there and letting people go through and figure out how the opportunity can be substituted. And then they can come back and they can put post-it notes in each one of these sections to be able to say, this is how I would do it. Now, I'm going to take a moment. Rachel, are there any clarifying questions?
No clarifying questions.
Excellent. So now we're going to start our descent. This is a place where the captain would announce you need to start putting away your electronic devices and getting back to your seat. So now we're going to figure out what is the idea we're going to do. One of the things that I tell my belts whenever I'm going through training is that the great thing about process improvement is that you come up with tons of ideas. But if you try to do them all, it's not going to be, you're going to be spreading out too thin. You need to focus on the one that makes the most difference. And so you really have to have a process of figuring out what that one looks like. In Don Norman's book, Don Norman explains that you need to have divergent thinking where you're thinking of lots of ideas. And this can be mind mapping or brainstorming. This is the heart of creativity. This is thinking of all sorts of different ideas and then going through and having a way to converge these ideas, either voting or through a priority payoff matrix. And in this model, there's the first part where you start off and you think of all the different ways to discover and then defining the opportunity that you're going to do. And then we develop different ideas and we deliver the ideas in this end of the double diamond. Now, there's some decision-making models that I go over in all of my classes. What I really focus on is that the first two, the command consultative, you have to have a discussion with your sponsor or the person that owns this in terms, your leader, in terms of what is the decision-making power of the team. If the decision-making and power of the team, if the decision is in the hands of the leader, you have to express this really clearly with the team. They can help think of lots of ideas, but it's the leader that's going to come up with this. If the leader empowers the team and says, you get to make the decision, then voting is a good way to go. Now, we can do voting by having people do ballots or raise their hand or dot voting. I've done lots of different things. Majority is probably the best way to do this. It's hard to get a unanimous decision, but there's certain types of Agile approaches that require unanimous decisions. Consensus is probably your best bet to be able to define the solution so that everybody is involved, so that everybody agrees with the solution. And then getting to that priority payoff matrix to be able to say, okay, how can we define the solution in two different ways that is business impact and ease of implementation? It's just another way of being able to get to that one decision. Now we're going to start trying to figure out how to actually decide on which one to do. Is once we've done that, then we say, okay, is it going to work? We have to be able to test it. So we're going to use our PDCA methodology or the testing. And I'll give you 3 different ways that we can go through and test this. So on PDCA, this is the Deming model that really says, what are we going to plan to do to test this out? What is the approach we're going to do? And then how do we measure success? So that the do phase is we're trying it out, and the check is to make sure it matches the outcome that we wanted. We can either go to act and implement or act or just and figure out what else to do. We also have to be aware of the testing methodology and figure out what does good look like? What does the outcome look like so we're matching up to do the right thing? Now, one of the ways we can do this is we can just go through and sit around a table and pilot this. A pilot is kind of an alpha test, a first test, a first draft test by trying this out. And we can give each person in the process a role and then walk through it verbally to stimulate and then simulate some of the process outcomes. And then to try what if scenarios to see if this will match the results. Another thing we can do is we can do the 3P approach where we build a small one, we build a medium to medium scale, and then we can try it on a large scale. I really like Jared Thatcher's talk on Tuesday, how they use gummy bears as part of this process is to be able to try gummy bears in a medium scale model to see how people move through the system. But what this is really doing is it's trying it out to see if it's working on 3 different scales. And then the standard, the type of prototyping that you see is we try to sketch it out so that people can use their visual management system to see if it can apply to what they're doing, to try to build a mock-up, which is a model, a non-functional model, to engage those visual systems and those tactile systems, and then to try it out and see if it actually gives the outcomes that you want. Now we're near the end. Now we're ready to land this plane. We're able to take and implement what we're doing. And so in this mental model, we've landed the plane. We're headed toward the airport. We're ready to try this out. And so some of the ways one of the ways that I'm going to promote is action planning. Action planning is doing the what, the who, and the when. When I teach project management is just advanced action planning in the dub. The what, the who, and the when. Defining the what, and then getting agreement on who will do it and when they're going to do it helps build accountability into your process so that you can help build that trust and make sure that you're back on track. Now, some of the factors you're going to have to build in for success and sustainability. Be clear about your roles. Who's doing what in this? Manage your resistance. Use good change management to identify resistance early on and manage it. If costs are an issue or costs are part of the equation, costs are part of this project, look at value instead of cost. How much value is each of these parts bringing? I think it's vital to be thinking about what could go wrong, that risk analysis, being able to take us to be able to look before we start to figure out what we can do wrong and avoid some of the bad things from happening. And then being very clear on the metrics of what the results look like. And then what do we look like in the long time? So that we're sustainability in the long game is we need to have engagement from our sponsors, whoever owns who has accountability for the process, who has authority and owns the resources really needs to be part of that sustainment process. They need to understand the metrics of success. They need to understand how this goes and then be able to provide recognition and reinforcement for those metrics of success. The sponsor is the one that mostly owns the motivation to get people to want to change. And then building in mutual accountability is a key factor in building trust and getting people to get engaged with a project like this. Now, to kind of recap, we started off with identifying the opportunities. Identifying the opportunities is key in the creative process because we have to have the problem or the gap in our heads or the root cause. Then we start to generate ideas. We either do that on our own or we do that in a team. But we need to prepare ourselves and have priming activities where we're going through and getting people to start to think creatively, think of different outcomes. Then we'll evaluate the idea that we want to go with, try it out, and then what are the steps to make it happen? All right. So that takes us at the journey. We are done with our adventure here. I've tried to add in everything that I've learned. Hopefully, is giving you some good ideas to be able to manage change on your own. Rachel, are there any questions?
Yes, we actually have a lot of really good questions. So we'll see how many we can get to. Um, First of all, you had a couple comments. Crystal said, I love the identify opportunities portion for mindsets, so spot on. And Janine said she's going to use this for an upcoming team meeting.
Excellent.
Um, okay, how does this process fit in with DMAIC and Lean? There is definitely overlapping steps with DMAIC and Lean, but it seems like more of a condensed version plus other aspects.
This can be applied well to DMAIC and Lean. DMAIC is a process, and you're basically following along with the process. You can plug and play these, and you can transfer each one of these into an aspect of Lean. You're spending more time on the analysis phase. You're doing that using metrics and numbers and statistics and data analysis, but you're basically following the process. And in the improved phase, this creative thinking is vital. In lean thinking, it's the process of identifying the waste and coming up with the solution. Sometimes in lean, we get so focused on the waste, we have to be able to take the breadcrumbs all the way to implement and sustain.
Thank you. All right, so we've got two sort of related questions. The first one is people are so buried in day-to-day firefighting that it's tough to create space for creativity. People expend their energy just trying to get things done. Can you speak to how executives can better sponsor conditions that enable people to embrace design thinking?
Okay, so one of the things that I teach in my classes is to be able to talk to leaders is you have to propose in terms of a contract. What is the benefit of this activity to them? Okay. Now we all know that we need more time, but when we're going to our executives, when we're going to our sponsors and saying we need time to fix this, we need to ask in a way that presents this on the benefit to them. If you give me more time, we're going to have a better process to deliver to our customers. If you give me more time, we'll come up with a process that's more productive. If you give me more time, we're going to come up with a process that's going to have less complaints for you to have to deal with. If we can couch these asks in terms of what's in the benefit for our leaders, we're more likely to get a positive response.
Awesome. And that you just answered the second question, which was how can we get executives to embrace this kind of thinking? So.
Exactly. And that's if we're in the trenches and we're doing these things, we see the problems. And to ask for help, we need to be able to put this in a framework that our leaders can understand.
Would you be able to expand a little on some of the virtual asynchronous, sorry, that's a hard word, asynchronous tools we could use and why you like them?
Okay. So the asynchronous tools I like using Mural and Miro. I've also used Whiteboard in different platforms in Zoom and WebEx. They're great in the synchronous space, but then they go away. And the reason I like using Mural or Miro in the asynchronous space is to build out your creative process, map it out, plan out the activities, build in the details, the instructions, put in the frameworks for them, and then invite people to them so they can participate in them, and they stay by giving people time to say, okay, I need everybody by 9 o'clock tomorrow to think of a good idea, to present the idea, give time for those people that need time to think about the idea, write it down. They come in the middle of the night, they wake up and they go, oh, I've got a great idea. They can put it on the Mural or Miro board and they can leave it. So I love using the Mural or Miro boards as a platform to collect and manage our ideas.
Awesome. And okay, very last question. You've mentioned a few books today. Do you have recommendations for what attendees should read?
I just put out in the chat. I just put a bunch of books out there that
Oh,
I talked through during this presentation. My favorite right now is Art of the Impossible by Stephen Kotler. Really highly recommended read. But all of these are really generally good books, and I also added a podcast by Brendan Boyle from IDEO. So these are some good reads. And then the Bossing Pants has that story of how to do improv.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm gonna post that again so that everyone can see it just to make sure. There we go. That should be in the chat for everyone now.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Eric.